My father called my promotion pathetic at Sunday dinner. He said it the way he said most things he meant seriously, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the specific quiet certainty of a man who has never been wrong in his own kitchen and sees no reason to start. He set down his fork, looked at me across the table, and said, "Regional Compliance Director. You've been at that agency for 14 years and that's where they put you. That's pathetic, Claire." My mother looked at her plate. My brother Ryan smiled, not the smile of someone who found it funny, the smile of someone who was glad the attention was elsewhere. I was 38 years old. I had spent 14 years with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I had worked cases that I could not discuss at Sunday dinner, in rooms I could not describe to my family, with outcomes that had never appeared in any newspaper with my name attached to them. I had been promoted 7 times in 14 years, each promotion the result of work that was, by its nature, invisible to the people sitting around this table. My father did not know any of this. He knew that I worked for the government. He knew I dealt with financial regulations. He knew I had a title that sounded, to a man who had built a construction company from nothing and measured success in contracts won and buildings standing, like something a bureaucrat would have. Regional Compliance Director. He wasn't entirely wrong that it sounded unimpressive. The things that would have impressed him, the cases, the outcomes, the scope of what the title actually contained, were not things I was at liberty to describe over pot roast. So I said, "Thank you for the perspective, Dad," and passed the bread basket to my left, and the conversation moved on. Ryan caught my eye across the table. His smile had become something else, the expression of a man who is more comfortable than he should be. I noticed. I filed it. I said nothing. My father's name is Gerald Harmon. He built Harmon Construction over 30 years into a company with 140 employees and an annual revenue that he mentioned at every family gathering in a way that was technically not bragging because he always framed it as information. "We closed a $22 million contract last week," he would say, handing the mashed potatoes to someone. Just information. He was proud of what he'd built. He had reason to be. The company was real, the work was real, the 30 years were real. I had never disputed any of it. What I had disputed, quietly, over the course of many years, was the logic that followed from it, the logic that said the only success worth naming was the kind you could quote in a dollar amount. The kind that came with a company name and a physical product and the ability to point at a building and say, "I built that." My work didn't produce buildings. My work produced, among other things, the end of financial arrangements that allowed certain people to do certain things that cost other people things they couldn't get back. It produced information that became evidence that became cases that became convictions. It produced, in one instance I will never be able to describe at a family dinner, the unraveling of a structure that had moved significant sums across several jurisdictions for several years and had funded several things I will also never describe. None of this was a building. My father could not point at any of it. He had decided, some years ago, that this meant it was less. Ryan was 4 years younger than me, which put him at 34 at the time of the Sunday dinner. He had joined Harmon Construction at 22, straight out of a business management degree that our father had paid for and that Ryan had treated as a formality rather than an education. He had worked his way, or been worked, depending on your perspective, into the role of operations director, which in a family business of that size meant he was effectively my father's second-in-command and designated successor. My father called Ryan his right hand. He said it often. He said it at family gatherings, at company events, at the Christmas party 3 years ago where I had stood with a glass of wine and listened to my father describe Ryan to a group of subcontractors as the future of the company in a tone that suggested the future of the company was the most important future anyone in the room should care about. Ryan had always been the favorite. Not in the quiet, unnamed way of family favorites, openly, unapologetically, in the specific style of a man who considered transparency about his preferences to be a form of honesty rather than cruelty. I had made peace with this. Not easily, not all at once, not without the years of work that making peace with something like that actually costs. But I had made it. I had my own life, my own career, my own version of success that didn't require my father's recognition to be real. What I had not made peace with, because it wasn't mine to make peace with, was what Ryan was actually doing. I didn't know the specifics. That's important to say. I didn't know the specifics, and I want to be precise about this, because what I knew and when I knew it and what I did with it matters in this story. What I knew was a feeling. A series of small observations that accumulated over several years into a shape I recognized from 14 years of looking at shapes like it. The expense reports Ryan mentioned, casually, at dinner. The subcontractors whose names appeared in conversation and then didn't appear again. The way my father talked about revenue in ways that didn't quite track, numerically, against the size of projects he also mentioned. The way Ryan, at family gatherings, always positioned himself slightly away from conversations that were happening near me. Shapes. I had spent 14 years learning to see shapes. I saw this one. The question that matters, the one I have been asked, directly, by people who found out what happened, and the one I have asked myself many times, is, what did I do with what I saw? The answer is complicated, and I want to give it honestly. The first thing I did was nothing. For approximately 8 months, I did nothing. I observed and I noted and I filed in my own mind and I did nothing, because what I had was not evidence. What I had was a shape. Shapes are not evidence. Shapes are the beginning of a question, and questions require more before they become anything actionable. The second thing I did was separate my professional life from my personal one with a precision that required sustained effort. I was a compliance professional. My brother worked in construction. These were two separate domains, and the fact that shapes in the second domain looked familiar to me from the first domain did not mean I had the standing, or the evidence, or the jurisdiction to act on them unilaterally. What it meant was that I had an obligation. A general, non-specific, professional obligation to ensure that what I was seeing was either reported appropriately or determined to be less than it appeared. I am going to be very careful here about what I say and what I don't say. Because some of what happened in the following months belongs to processes and institutions that I was part of in a professional capacity, and those processes are not mine to describe in detail. What I will say is this: I made certain disclosures. To the appropriate people, in the appropriate form, through the appropriate channels. I made them carefully, with the appropriate qualifications about what I knew versus what I suspected. I made them without knowing what would happen as a result. And then I went to Sunday dinners and passed the bread basket and listened to my father call my promotion pathetic. The Sunday dinner where he said it was in March. Federal investigators came to Harmon Construction's main office on a Tuesday in September. 6 months. 6 months of Sunday dinners. 6 months of my father's assessments of my career. 6 months of Ryan's smile across the table. 6 months of my mother's careful attention to her plate. I want to describe those 6 months accurately, because people sometimes imagine that periods like this are dramatic, that you're waiting with held breath, counting down, anticipating. That's not what it's like. What it's like is ordinary life, with an awareness underneath it that doesn't go away. Every conversation has 2 layers. Every observation is both what it appears to be and an addition to a file you're maintaining at all times. You are functional, professional, present, and you are also, underneath all of that, watching. I had a case during those 6 months that had nothing to do with any of this, a complex multi-jurisdictional matter that required most of my professional attention and all of my professional energy. I worked that case. I went to meetings. I wrote reports. I supervised my team. I went to Sunday dinners. In June, my father mentioned at dinner that the company had won a new municipal contract. He mentioned the value. The number was, I noted, significantly higher than what the public procurement record for that contract showed. The difference was not enormous. But it was there. I noted it. In August, Ryan arrived at Sunday dinner 20 minutes late, which he never did. He was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet, the quiet of someone managing something rather than simply relaxing. He left early. My father watched him go with an expression I hadn't seen before, not concern exactly, but something adjacent to it. I noted that too. I found out about the investigators the way most family members find out, after the fact, from a phone call, from a voice that was trying to be controlled and wasn't entirely succeeding. My mother called me at 7:15 on a Tuesday evening. She said, "Something has happened at the company." I said, "Tell me." She told me what she knew, which was partial: federal investigators, documents, Ryan had called from the office, Gerald had gone down there. She used the word investigators 3 times in 2 minutes. She was not crying. My mother doesn't cry at moments of crisis. She cries later, when everything is resolved and the crying doesn't cost anything. I listened. I asked a small number of precise questions. I told her I would call her back. Then I sat in my kitchen for approximately 15 minutes and did not do anything. This is the part of the story that is hardest to describe accurately, because what I felt in those 15 minutes was not what people expect. People expect vindication, or satisfaction, or some version of "I told you so" finally arriving at its moment. None of those things were what I felt. What I felt was something much quieter and much heavier. My brother was in serious trouble. My father, who had not known, I believed, the full scope of what Ryan had been doing, who had been used as well as complicit in ways I couldn't fully parse from where I was sitting, my father's company was in serious trouble. My mother, who had spent 30 years managing the household that my father's company made possible, was going to spend the coming months managing the fallout of something she had not caused and could not have prevented. These were the facts. They were not abstract facts. They were the facts of people I had known my whole life, sitting in rooms I had sat in my whole life, dealing with something that was going to cost them in ways that went well past the financial. I was not glad. I want to be clear about that. I was not glad. I was something else, something without a clean name, something that sits at the intersection of having done what was right and the right thing having consequences that fall on people you love. I called my mother back. I told her to stay home. I told her that Gerald should not speak to anyone without a lawyer present, that Ryan should not speak to anyone without a lawyer present, that the instinct to explain or clarify or cooperate without counsel is an instinct that causes significant damage in these situations and should be resisted. I told her this in the calm, even tone of someone who has given this guidance many times in professional contexts and knows precisely how important it is. She listened. She said, "You know about this kind of thing?" "Yes," I said. "From work?" "Yes." A pause. "Is Ryan going to be all right?" I thought about the honest answer. "I don't know yet," I said. "Get him a lawyer tonight. A good one." She said she would. She also said, "Claire, did you know?" I had known she would ask this. I had prepared for this question, in the abstract, for months. I knew what the honest answer was and I knew it was going to cost something to say it. "I saw things that concerned me," I said. "I handled it through the appropriate professional channels. I didn't discuss it with you or Dad because I couldn't, not because I didn't want to." Silence. "How long ago?" she said. "A while," I said. She was quiet for a long time. "Okay," she said finally. Not warmly. But okay. That had to be enough. The following weeks were the most difficult of the domestic portion of this story, which is separate from the professional portion, which proceeded along its own track with its own timeline, which I am not going to describe. My father called me on a Thursday, 8 days after the investigators came to the office. He called in the evening. He was not the version of my father I was used to on the phone, not the efficient, declarative man who called to communicate specific information and ended calls as soon as the information had been communicated. He was slower. Something in the voice was different. He talked for a while about the company. About what was happening. About lawyers and documents and a process that was, as he described it, completely out of his control, a thing he had never said about anything in his life, and the saying of it cost him in ways I could hear. Then he said, "They told me some of it had been going on for 3 years. "Yes," I said. "Ryan." He said the name the way you say a name when you're still integrating what it contains. I didn't know. "I believe you," I said. And I did. My father was many things. A man who would knowingly participate in what Ryan had built, I didn't believe that. He had been used. His name and his company had been used. This was, in some ways, its own category of damage. Did you? He said. The question was quiet. It wasn't accusatory, there wasn't the energy in it for accusation. It was the question of a man trying to understand the shape of something that had happened around him without his knowledge. I saw things, I said. I did what I was required to do professionally. Silence. Why didn't you come to me? He said, and this was the question I had also been preparing for. Because I couldn't, Dad. Not without compromising a professional process that wasn't mine to compromise. And because, I paused. Because you would have gone to Ryan. And then we wouldn't be having this conversation right now, we'd be having a different one, and it would be worse. He was quiet for a long time. You were protecting the process, he said finally. Yes. Another long silence. What about Ryan? Get him the best lawyer you can afford, I said. That's all I can tell you. He said he would, then he said something I hadn't expected. The promotion, he said. In March. I said. I know what you said. I didn't, he stopped. I didn't know what you did. What you actually did. No, I said. You didn't. I should have asked. I held the phone and looked at the wall of my kitchen and thought about 14 years of Sunday dinners and bread baskets and the specific quality of my father's assessments of things he didn't understand. Yes, I said. You should have. He didn't say anything after that. We stayed on the line for a moment. I'm sorry, Claire, he said. For March, for more than March. I thought about how to answer this. I know, I said. That was all I said. Not because I didn't have more to say. Because some things need time before there's room for more. Ryan cooperated. I can say this because it became public record. He cooperated with investigators, provided information, entered into an agreement that resulted in consequences I am not going to describe in detail because they belong to his story more than mine. The company survived, in reduced form. My father restructured, sold 2 subsidiaries, brought in outside management for the day-to-day operations. He is still involved, but differently. He is, from what I can see at Sunday dinners, which I still attend, because they are still Sunday dinners, and family is still family, a man who has been through something that has reorganized several things he thought were fixed. He asks about my work now. Not with the old assessment, not the evaluative tone of a man comparing your output to a benchmark he's already decided is the only one that counts. He asks differently. With something that might be curiosity, if you're generous, or might be a man doing the work of correcting something he held wrong for a long time. I answer, not completely, there are things I will never be able to describe at a Sunday dinner, and this hasn't changed. But I answer more than I used to. My mother has never again asked me whether I knew. We have had other conversations, important ones, that have clarified things between us that needed clarifying. We are closer than we were. Ryan is a complicated part of the aftermath. We speak occasionally. The conversations are not easy. They are honest, which is a different thing from easy, and probably more valuable in the long run. He is not a villain in my understanding of this story. He is a person who made choices over a period of years that compounded into consequences he didn't, I think, fully see coming. He understood one kind of pressure, our father's expectations, the company's demands, and didn't fully understand another kind, which was the kind that accumulates in financial systems when the records don't match the reality. He understands it now. I want to say something about the promotion. Regional Compliance Director. The title my father called pathetic in March, across the pot roast, in the kitchen that smelled like every Sunday kitchen I'd ever sat in. The role involves oversight of a geographic area's financial compliance activities. It involves supervising a team of professional investigators and analysts. It involves being the person who, when a team member brings a shape that looks like something, makes the decision about what to do with that shape. I have made that decision many times. Most of the time, the shape turns out to be something that explains itself cleanly, an anomaly with an innocent origin, a pattern that resolves when you have more information. Most of the time, the report goes nowhere consequential. Sometimes it doesn't. The title doesn't tell you which kind of decision you'll be making on any given day. It doesn't tell you that the shape you're looking at might belong to someone you see on Sundays. It doesn't tell you that the appropriate channel and the correct professional process might, eventually, produce consequences that fall in ways you didn't fully anticipate when you made the disclosure. It tells you the region and the function. The rest of it is invisible. That's the nature of the work. My father, building his company, could always see what he was building. He could walk a job site and see the progress. He could look at a blueprint and see the finished structure. He could point at a building, a real, physical, permanent building, and say, "I did that." I have never been able to do that. What I can do is look at a financial record and see what it's not saying. What I can do is recognize, at dinner, in a casual mention of contract values, a number that doesn't match a public record. What I can do is make a disclosure to the appropriate people in the appropriate form and wait, for 6 months, for the process to run. None of this is a building, all of it is something. My father is beginning to understand this. It took federal investigators coming for his favorite son to get him there, which is not the path I would have designed. But we don't get to design the paths. We get to walk them. There is one more thing I want to say. The Sunday dinner in March, when my father called my promotion pathetic, I didn't defend myself. I said thank you for the perspective and passed the breadbasket. This is the choice that most people find hardest to understand when I describe it. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you correct him? The answer is layered. The first layer, I couldn't say anything that would have been true and complete and useful. The things that would have corrected his picture were things I couldn't say. The second layer, I had been saying things for years. Not about classified work, about the general shape of what I did, its value, its complexity. He heard them as the claims of a bureaucrat defending a bureaucratic career. They bounced off. You cannot correct someone's picture of you when they have already decided what the frame looks like. The third layer, I had, somewhere in the previous years, stopped needing him to correct it. Not because I stopped wanting his respect. I'm not going to pretend that was easy or complete. I'm human, and he's my father, and the wanting doesn't disappear simply because you decide it's not productive to organize your life around it. But I had stopped needing it in the sense that matters professionally, the sense in which your work's value is determined by whether the person across the table from you understands it. My work's value was not determined by my father's understanding, it was determined by whether the records matched, whether the shapes resolved correctly, whether the disclosures I made were accurate and timely and complete. That Tuesday in September, that was my work's value, visible. Not to me. I was in my office, working a case that had nothing to do with Harmon Construction, when investigators were walking into that building. But visible. Real. A building my father couldn't see, made of things he didn't have the vocabulary for, standing in a place he had no map to. It was standing. It had been standing for 14 years. The promotion was not pathetic. The promotion was the 15th floor of something my father had never visited and couldn't quite imagine, a structure built from invisible materials, without a blueprint he could read, in a jurisdiction he had never needed to understand. He is learning to imagine it now. We have coffee sometimes, on Saturdays. Not the family dinners, just the two of us, a diner near his house, an hour. He asks questions. I answer what I can. He listens in a way that is new, or that I hadn't noticed before, or that I am only able to receive now that something has shifted between us. Last month he asked me, "Is it interesting?" The work. Day to day. I thought about the question. Yes, I said. It's the most interesting thing I've ever done. He nodded slowly. I never asked you that before, he said. No, I said. You didn't. He looked at his coffee. I'm sorry I didn't, he said. I know, I said. We sat there for a while, and then we talked about other things, his grandchildren, my apartment renovation, a documentary he'd watched about bridge construction that he thought I might find interesting. I told him I would watch it. I haven't yet. But I will. Some things take a little time. Some things, once started, don't stop. That's the nature of structures built carefully. They stand. I still go to Sunday dinners. The pot roast is the same. The kitchen smells the same. My mother sets the table with the same dishes she has always used, and my father sits at the head and tells us things that are technically information. Ryan comes sometimes. Not every week. When he does, the table is quiet in certain ways and loud in others, and we navigate it the way families navigate things, imperfectly, with more grace than you'd expect, with occasional failures that get resolved or don't. I sit in my usual chair. I pass the bread basket when it comes to me. And sometimes my father looks at me across the table, not the old look, the assessment, the measurement against a benchmark I didn't know and couldn't meet, but something different. The look of a man who is still learning the shape of something he spent many years not bothering to see. I let him look. He's earning it. We both are. That's how it goes, with the invisible work. Slowly, quietly, over time, it becomes visible. Not always in the way you planned. Not always at the table where you would have chosen. But visible. Standing. Real.